King Kong is one of cinema's most iconic fantasy characters. Since being first introduced in 1933, the classic monster has been adapted on numerous occasions, including remakes in 1976 and 2005. The latest film, Kong Skull Island, offers an alternate vision of the gigantic gorilla. Released in March 2017, the film is not necessarily a prequel as speculated prior to production, but is instead a reboot opening a new franchise known as Monsterverse, following 2014's Godzilla. Kong Skull Island follows in the footsteps of many reboots that reintroduce iconic characters, only this time we see a different interpretation rather than the same. For example, there are some overlapping themes of war that correspond to the story, particularly as it is set in the 1970s during the Vietnam War. This immediately confirms that it isn't a prequel, but Kong Skull Island stands out in the sense of showing a new vision of war within a fantasy context, similar to how other contemporary fantasy films have a growing intersection on politics and terrorism. On many occasions, the imagery from this film shows an identical parallel to the Vietnam War and draws many visual similarities from other films based on it, particularly Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. This seems fairly obvious judging from another Kong Skull Island poster and the cinematography. It shows a clear inspiration, but this is also a flaw. It seems to get its point across too excessively and doesn't really have its own unique visual style. Despite this though, Kong Skull Island is probably the most masculine adaptation to date that involves the monstrous gorilla in terms of tone and characterization. Much of this is stemmed from the character's monster movie origins and his progressing dramatization in remakes. These physical and emotional traits are merged together in this film. It doesn't necessarily centre on how Kong became king, but opened information about his background and about the island's history. The scale of Kong is different too. In addition to still growing at a fairly young age, he is significantly larger, standing at probably 100 feet tall and walks on feet. His physical presence is similar to that of a human being, which makes him even more monstrous as a gigantic gorilla. At the same time, the development of Kong introduces his emotional side, so in this sense, in discussing the Kong character, this is a monster film, but with a dramatic and wartime context. Alongside Kong, there was also a variety of strange creatures that made it even more a monster film. While some were considered innocent, others were predators and dangerous to the crew and other animals. Despite this though, there was one in particular called the Alpha Skullcrawler that was built up as a primary antagonist and physical nemesis for Kong, but it was underdeveloped, at least until it eventually showed up. Hopefully we'll see Kong in action with more rounded characters in the future, and were as well developed as him, one of which could include, spoiler alert, Godzilla. In addition to its titular character and other supporting creatures, the film also stars an impressive ensemble cast, whose roles are basically recycled from those in previous adaptations. Tom Hiddleston portrays James Conrad, a former British officer who appears as this save-the-day hero, following in similar footsteps to Jack Driscoll. Brie Larson portrays photojournalist Mason Weaver. Although subtly shown, the beast did resist beauty this time. Only Larson's character dismisses the damsel in distress female, like Ann Darrow previously showed with Kong and her human colleagues. Instead, Larson takes a step forward with a sense of masculinity and physical strength while among a group of men, and still maintains the natural beauty of her character. Samuel L. Jackson also stars as American Lieutenant Preston Packard, who is on a mission but ends up being consumed by his obsessive determination to complete it, as well as his own anger and hatred, similar to that of Carl Denham. We also see John C. Reilly, John Goodman and Toby Kebbell in supporting roles. Overall, Kong Skull Island doesn't directly remake or offer a complete backstory to the character. It isn't a new piece of a long puzzle, but the start of a new one. It may have reintroduced the Kong character that follows a fairly similar storyline, but it is still a new vision of that world that you will either like or you won't. As expected, its action sequences were off the chart, but it still seemed lazy for the cinematography and a fraction of its pre-release marketing campaign to have been drawn so closely to Apocalypse Now, especially considering the mutual Vietnam War timeline. The primary monster against Kong could have been better developed too. Nevertheless, despite its recycled details and hints, Kong Skull Island worked nicely, it's pretty good entertainment, and it's a solid return for the giant gorilla. I rate this film with an impressive 4 stars.